Conscription. It's defined as compulsory enrollment of persons, most often in the context of military service. It's not something most Western European nations or North Americans have to live with. However, it tends to be a reality the further east you get. In 2023, the Latvian parliament decided to reintroduce compulsory military service in the country after repealing the policy in 2007. Lithuania abolished it in 2008 but reintroduced it in 2015. Meanwhile, Estonia has had conscription since it regained independence in 1991 and has retained this compulsory service ever since. But as you can imagine, conscription and how it is administered still varies widely between all nations, not just the Baltics. But for today's video, we will examine the compulsory military service policies of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, going over each country one at a time. We'll start north with Estonia, then go to Latvia, and end with Lithuania. So feel free to skip to whatever country you're most interested in. Now, there's a lot of detail for each of the Baltic nations and their conscription policies, ages, minimum terms, exceptions, and the list goes on. We'll do our best to strike a balance between providing interesting details while not boring you to death with too much detail. And so, starting with Estonia, conscript service in the defense forces applies to all physically and mentally healthy male citizens. This applies to men ages 17 to 27, although there are a few things that are required. Military service is mandatory if you have completed at least 6th grade, you meet certain health requirements, you do not have a deferral nor exemption, and there is no other basis for not being called up for military service. Call-ups for conscription service in Estonia take place 3 times a year. It appears that each year the government sets a quota. This is something you'll see with all 3 countries. And so once all voluntary conscripts are registered, call-ups for compulsory non-voluntary individuals go out. As of April 1st, 2013, women can serve in the conscript service, however it's not compulsory in the way that it is for men. The duration of the conscript service is 8 or 11 months, and this depends on the selectee's level of education and the position to which the defense forces assign the conscript. Assignments can range widely, from serving in an infantry battalion to the military cyber command and even with Estonia's Special Operations Forces. In the case of the latter assignment, after basic and specialty courses, selected conscripts will continue in Estsov, learning the tactics of small units, operating behind enemy lines, and surviving in difficult circumstances, and more. Upon completion of conscript service, individuals are placed in the reserve, where they are routinely called up for reservist training to reinforce the skills they've already learned. When an employee enters military service, the employer is obliged to maintain the employee's place of work or service. The employer is also obliged to give the employee time off so that he or she can complete the mandatory procedures related to entering military service, such as undergoing a health assessment. A deferral can be issued to postpone a conscript's entry into military service for a specified period. This might be an obligation to support children or parents, or due to having a position in local, national, or EU government. It may also be necessary to apply for an extension due to pursuing education. A conscript who has refused military service for religious or moral reasons is required to complete 12 months of alternative service. A 2018 article stated that on average 1,000 Estonian men are fined annually for evading conscription or alternative service. That article said that penalties averaged €500, so it sounds like the penalty varies depending on the circumstances. There are also penalties issued to those who fail to attend the health assessment. Men can also be arrested for not reporting for conscript service. So, those are the basics of Estonia, but what about Latvia? Well, Latvian citizens aged 18 to 27 are invited to apply voluntarily for the National Defense Service several months in advance using the unified recruitment platform at this website. Conscription, what Latvia calls the National Defense Service, is compulsory for men, but again voluntary for women. With Latvia only reintroducing conscription recently, it has been phasing in various groups. And so, until 2027, those living and declared abroad will not be conscripted. However, afterwards they will also be subject to military service. The 11-month service in the National Armed Forces unit will be carried out in 4 places: in the Land Forces Mechanized Infantry Brigade, in the 2nd or 3rd Brigade of the National Guard, or in the Air Force. Like Estonia, Latvia will first take in those who come voluntarily. Then, in order to complete the missing part of the quota, conscription into the National Defence Military Service shall be carried out by means of a random selection. Latvia rewards those who enroll voluntarily, and so someone volunteering for service and is serving 11 months in a National Armed Forces unit receives a monthly compensation of €600. However, a soldier conscripted into the National Defence Service receives a monthly compensation of €300. Severance pay after the end of service is €1,100 for volunteers, and the amounts are cash in hand, meaning no tax is taken from these figures. National Defence Military Service in Latvia can be performed in one of the following ways. Number 1, 11 months in a unit of the regular forces of the National Armed Forces or the National Guard. Number 2, 5 years in the National Guard in total, performing service tasks for no less than 21 days of individual training and no more than 7 days of collective training each year. Or 3, by completing the Reserve Officer Program intended for university and college students within 5 years at a military educational institution and a unit of the National Armed Forces. And then when it comes to the long list of exemptions, there are over 11 cases. These range from health conditions to responsibilities to care for dependents. People with criminal records may also be exempt, as are those holding certain positions in government. Citizens are also exempt if they also have the citizenship of another member state of the European Union, a member state of the European Free Trade Association, a member state of NATO, Australia, Brazil, New Zealand, or Ukraine, and they have served in foreign military service or have performed national defense civilian service abroad. And finally, a citizen assessed by the Military Intelligence and Security Service to not be in the interests of national security is also exempt. That's not everything, so if you are a Latvian citizen who needs to know more about conscription, we encourage you to do more research on your own. Considering deferrals, National Defence Service will be postponed no later than until the age of 26. The law states that Latvians will be held criminally liable for evading the performance of National Defence Military Service. Failure to show up without reason will result in a fine of up to €350. Like Estonia, alternative service is available. The alternative service work is assigned based on the person's skills, place of residence, and education, and takes 40 hours per week. For alternative service, the person will get health insurance and possibly accommodation. In Latvia, alternatives take place at a variety of institutions including the Youth Guard Centre, Latvian Geospatial Information Centre, Latvian Museum of War, State Defence and Logistics Procurement Centre, Latvian National Defence Academy, Information Technology Safety Incident Prevention Agency, the Military Intelligence and Security Service, and more. Those with children will get benefits while in military service, and these children can also be enrolled in state kindergartens in priority order. And finally, we've reached Lithuania. Well, at the moment, roughly 4,000 Lithuanian citizens are called up for mandatory military service each year. However, the Defence Ministry expects that up to 5,000 young men could be called up for military service each year once government reform is implemented. The annual list of draftees is comprised of male Lithuanian citizens between 18 and 23 years of age. The pool of eligible names is in the tens of thousands and are randomly chosen by a computer. This even includes eligible Lithuanian citizens living abroad. To ensure that the process is completely transparent and impartial, the procedure is observed by representatives of public organizations. Lists are compiled using information from citizens, student registries, and checked against the country's disability agency. Students who find themselves on the conscription list have a few options. They can either pause their studies to get their military service over with, they can choose a 3-year-long junior officers part-time course, or they can enlist at the part-time National Defence Volunteer Force for 3 years. They can also delay their draft until the end of their studies, but they'll be included in the draft call until they're 26, instead of the usual age of 23. The compiled lists of conscripts for the calendar year are published on this website. A new list seems to be generated every January. One website notes that it's the individual responsibility of each Lithuanian citizen to check the conscription list, since conscripts aren't directly informed. However, we don't know if this is still the case, since other sources discuss the distribution of conscription notices. For those who have received conscription notices but failed to report for duty within a month, their information is handed over to the police. Evading service will carry a penalty between 60 and €210, while failure to perform compulsory military service may result in a fine of €280 to €450. You could also find yourself in prison for up to 3 years. Men who have reached the age of 17 have 1 month to contact the military conscription and recruitment service to undergo their initial medical checkup to determine whether they are fit for military service. There are several exemptions listed on the official website. It includes persons deemed legally incompetent or of limited legal capacity, and persons with health issues and are deemed unfit by a military panel. There's also a long list of eligible deferments, but here are just a few examples. Various government officials, including members of parliament and other ministries and departments, those suspected and accused in criminal proceedings or serving their sentence, anyone raising a child alone, those who are legally appointed sole caretakers of a disabled person, or clergy. There also seems to be a catch-all exemption that allows deferment if military service would cause, quote, disproportionate damage to his personal and public interests, which could be avoided if military service would be performed at other times. The example provided is a father of 2 young children or someone who is the only working family breadwinner. If you're chosen, then 9 months of service is required. Conscript soldiers will be paid monthly allowances, while their former or new employer after service will be paid 6 months subsidy. What you're paid depends on how you're evaluated and whether or not you signed up voluntarily or had to do it because it was mandatory, similar to Latvia. Lithuania also provides an alternative civil service option for those who object to compulsory military service due to religious or pacifist beliefs. If you take this route, then instead of the normal 9 months of military service, it's 10 months. So those are the basics when it comes to conscription across the Baltic states. Again, there are loads of exemptions and reasons for deferral, so if conscription is something that directly impacts you, we encourage you to do further research. But what are your thoughts on these policies? Do you think one country's administration of conscription is better than the others? Let us know what you think by leaving a comment.